Okay, so this is the 2024 IT November exam paper. A lot of students struggle with this one because the questions are asked a little bit differently than they usually are, especially in question 4. Something very weird happens there. So this video is just for me to walk you through step by step how to think about these questions and how to obviously answer them, right? So let's get started. As usual, we're jumping straight to page 8. That is where the OOP section starts. We won't be covering SQL as I believe OOP is the biggest struggle point for most students, right? And then again, we won't be reading any of this. I advise you do the same in your paper because this is really just to waste your time. Only come back if you really don't know what's going on. But in our case, question 2 is pretty straightforward. So let's jump right into it. So we're given a few fields here. Whoops, what am I doing? I was about to type that thing out, but there is a shortcut. You can just insert that code. That's our constructor. And if we see here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 fields in the constructor, and we also have 4 fields here. I always recommend counting just in case, they don't match up. You might lose some marks if you're not too careful there. So we generate. Okay, so we should rename these fields as stated in the constructor here in the class diagram. And if you don't do this in your paper, you will lose marks. So just be careful with these variable names. Okay, all right, that's the constructor. And then we have these getters to implement. So insert code again, getters. We have get artist name, get title, and get likes. Generate. Cool. And then get well liked, right? So this one's a bit different. As you can see at the top here, we don't have a field called well liked. So this means that we cannot insert this method. A few people get confused. They see get and instantly think of, inserting code, but that's not always the case. Be careful of those things. Make sure you understand what's actually happening. So in this case, get well liked is a method that we have to manually create. And the class diagram says it's a Boolean method, right? So get well liked, okay. And then we don't know what's happening in that method yet. So we'll leave it blank for now and finish off implementing the class diagram. All we have left is our toString. So toString, that's also something we can insert. So we come here, insert the toString. It doesn't matter what you select here, we're going to change it. So generate. And then we remove all this stuff, right? This is the default toString. We don't want any of that. We are going to be given a specific template to follow. But in the meantime, before we approach any of these questions, let's now read what's happening here, all right? So 2.1, you'll see was just telling you to make the class, which we've done. 2.2 was telling you to make the constructor, which we've done. 2.3, telling you to make the fields and the getters. 2.4 now, that's where it's telling us what to do with get well liked. So you see how even without reading these questions, 2.1 to 2.3, just by implementing the class diagram, we basically answered them. And that saves you a lot of time in the paper because you spend less time reading and more time actually writing code. So always start with the class diagram and then come to the questions. Because sometimes reading all these words can only serve to confuse you and you forget the basics like how to implement this stuff, right? So always start with what you know and then come back for clarity if needed, which is what we're doing now. We may get well liked, but it's empty. So we're coming to question 2.4 for clarity to see on what we should actually be doing. And then it tells us a song is well liked if the number of likes is greater than the number of dislikes. So our method should return whether the song is well liked or not. And all that means is that if likes greater than dislikes, we return true. Oops. Else we return false, right? This means it's well liked. That means it's not well liked. That's all it is. 2.5 now, this is our toString. We're given a template to follow. I won't even read that. I just look at the template itself. And it says that we should return the title. Separated by a tab, we have the likes. Separated by a tab, we have the dislikes. Type correctly. Okay, that's it. 13 marks. I spent like not a lot of time on this, right? 2.3, no, question 3, sorry. All right, now it's time for question 3. So this needs us to make another class called musician, and we're also given a class diagram. So again, we start implementing that class diagram before consulting the questions. Right. So let's firstly make that class. So we make new class musician. Hopefully I typed that correctly. We zoom in and create class diagram again. So I'll skip this part through. Okay, and just something about the date. Whenever you see this date type here in the paper, that means that you're supposed to create a local date object in your code. A lot of people just end up doing something like this, but this is wrong, right? There's no date object. You're supposed to use local date. And then you'll get this squiggly red line underneath. All that means is that you should import local date, right? So click on that little light bulb, add import, and the error is gone. Just something to note for that, right? And then we're given these 4 extra fields. They're both underlined and all caps, right? So all caps tells us that it's a final variable, it's constant, and then underlined means that it's static. Now, if those are unfamiliar concepts to you, just look at what I'm going to type out now, and it should hopefully make some more sense. Public static final, rock, right, is equal to 1, right? Whoops, forgot to type. Right, so public static final int rock equals 1. So all caps, final, underlined, static. Right, and I'll just copy this 3 more times. These here, I'm a piano. I don't know who made this paper, but clearly they were trying to appeal to the youth here. All right. And then we also have the constructor to create. So that's something we can insert. Constructor, select all again. Let's just double check. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Generate. Then we change the names again. So then we have the constructor there, and then again, getters. So we have get name, get start, get genre. Let's insert that as well. Oh, that's setters, my bad. Insert. We want getters for name, start, and genre. Okay, generate. And then I see we also need a setter for genre, right? So let's do that. Insert, setter, genre, generate. Right, and then lastly, we have a toString as well. So let's check out toString, insert toString, generate, remove all that, and we just can return empty for now. Okay, so now we can approach the questions and actually read what's happening, right? So 3.1 again, telling you to make the variables and the class. 3.2 telling you to make these static final variables. 3.3 now, something special is happening. This is to do with our constructor. So let's just see what's happening, right? So it says make a constructor that will accept the parameters, right? So that's pretty straightforward. Now the difference here is this point that they make here, this last point. So the way that we assign stage name has to change, right? So it says if in stage is an empty string, then assign in name to stage name field. All right. So what is in stage? Well, in stage is this parameter here. So what they're saying is we should check if this is empty. And if it is, then we assign in name to stage name. All right. So the way we are assigning this has to change. We don't do this anymore. Just remove that. And what we should rather be doing is checking if in stage is empty, then we are assigning stage name to be equal to in name, right? Something like that. Else we assign it as normal if it's not empty. Okay. Right. So we wouldn't have seen that if we didn't read the question. All right. And then 3.4, add exercise methods for name and start. Those are just the getters, right? So for name, and we also have for start. And then now get genre. So we made it, but something special seems to be happening with get genre. So let's look at it here. It says code a method called get genre to return a string representing the genre of the musician. And this method should return, and then they give us the return results here. So there's a bit of an issue with what we've been doing so far, right? Because remember, we just inserted get genre as we did with the other variables. But there's an issue because they're saying that get genre should be a string method, right? It should return a string. So this is again another mistake that you could have made in the paper if you weren't too careful, right? And we'll see that the class diagram also gave us a hint, but we didn't look at it. We didn't pay attention, right? So if you look closely, get genre is a string method. You see that? So what we were supposed to do is change this from int to string. And then obviously this can't work as expected anymore because the genre variable is an int. So the way the method works changes, and it changes based on what they're telling us in 3.5, right? 3.5 here, right? So let's now look. Code a get genre method to return a string representing the genre of the musician. So what they're saying is that if the value of genre, and by genre, we're talking about this integer at the top here, right? So if the value of genre equals rock, because what is genre? Genre is an int, rock is an int, right? So if genre equals rock, then we return rock. And then we can do this for a bunch more times. Just actually speed things up here. Rather than lastly, we return uncategorized if genre is none of those values. Okay. Right. That's that. And now we proceed to 3.6. 3.6 was just telling us to make a setter for genre, which we did. That's all good. And then 3.7 now, this is the toString method. Again, we don't read any of that. We just look at the template itself and come to our toString and change that. So this is again separated by tabs for genre as well here. Start. Okay, that is that. Okay, question 4 now. Right, so this needs us to make another class. So we come up here again, new class. Class is called music manager, right? And you'll notice that this paper doesn't have any inheritance in it. So some might say that the 2024 guys were a bit lucky, but I don't know. I personally would have preferred inheritance to what's about to happen here. So now we are prompted to create, this is 4.2, create 4 fields in the music manager class. Firstly, we'll make an array called muse array to store up to 100 musician objects. Okay, so let's make that array. Private musician, is that how you spell musician? I think so. Musician array, muse array equals new musician, says 100. Okay. And then next one is muse size is equal to 0, right? And then I'll just repeat that for these next two here. I'm going to type it out again. So this is changing to song, and this is becoming song array. That becomes song again, and this becomes song size, right? So a few people struggle with defining arrays. So I wrote them out quickly, and now I'll explain how to kind of remember the format here, right? So the way you create variables in Java is there's 3 steps to it, right? There's the type. I'm looking at the int now. There's the type, there's the name, and then there's the value, right? Type, name, value. So the same thing happens with our arrays, right? It stays the same thing. In this case, what is the type of the array that we should be making? This first one here, that 4.2 is saying. Well, the type of the array should be musician because our array is storing musicians, right? So musician, those square brackets indicate that this is an array. So our type is musician array. The name of the array is muse array. And then the value is an array that can store up to 100 musician objects. Type, name, value. Not too different from what's happening on this line here with integers. So oftentimes you know what to do. The issue is just that you overcomplicate things in your head. But if you can keep that idea of type, name, value, I think you should be okay. Right now, that's too much time spent on just defining arrays. Let's actually answer the question. Right. So I made these private as well because the question itself specifies that the field should not be accessible outside of the class. Right. Okay. So now 4.3 says create or construct a method that will read the content of the text file called musicdata.txt containing information about musicians and songs. Okay. Before we even read any further, let's do what we know. And what we know is how to read from a text file. I hopefully hope that you know how to read from a text file. If not, here it is. Right. Reading from a text file has 4 steps, right? Step 1 is we need to open the file. Step 2, we need to loop through the file. Step 3, I don't know why I did that. Step 3 is read each line, right? And then step 4, do something with the line. If you can keep these 4 steps in mind, the code should flow naturally. Never, 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 ever try to cram this code here, because if you forget one little thing, you messed up and then you lose 15 marks, right? But if you understand what's happening and why we need to do it, the 15 marks is almost guaranteed. So do not cram what I'm about to show you. Understand it. If something doesn't make sense, just like write a comment or something. All right. So step 1, open the file. To open a file in Java, we need to create a scanner object. Scanner, I usually call it SC file, right? Scanner SC file equals new scanner. And then we tell it that it's opening a file, right? So this scanner is going to read in our file. And the paper says that our file is called musicdata.txt. So that's what we type in here, musicdata.txt. Right, let me just enter here so it's a bit more readable. .txt, right? And then we get a few errors. All these are saying is that we have to firstly import scanner, and then again we have to import file, and then now we get another error. This error, if we read it, it's saying surround statement with try catch, right? That's what we want to do. That's the solution here. So second one. Now this just looks a bit messy. Let me clean it up first, and then I'll explain what's happening. So south file not found, right? Just maybe, hopefully that's a bit better to read. And then let me remove these unused imports, right? So the thing that's happening here is that I can actually zoom out a bit now. Oops. All right. So the thing that's happening is we are trying to open our file, right? But now in the case that the file is not found, what's supposed to happen, right? That's the issue. That's what Java was complaining about. So we add a try catch block. So try means that I want to try and open my file. So try and do this, try and open the file. And in the case that the file is not found, catch that error. And instead of breaking the code, just print file not found, right? That's all this is saying. And now we proceed to step 2, which is loop through the file. So while scfile dot has next line, so while there is a next line in my file, keep looping. This ensures that we loop until we reach the end of the file. So that's step 2. Step 3 now is read each line. So we want to get the line, string line equals scfile dot next line. That one almost reads like English. Give me the next line in the file, right? And we keep doing this for each and every single line in our text file, right? So that's step 3. Okay, so now that we have the first 3 steps done, the 4th step requires us to know what the text file actually looks like, because we can't do anything with the file if we don't know what's inside of the file, right? And now this is where we can maybe just read a bit more about the question itself, right? So it says that this text file musicdata.txt contains information about musicians and songs. The first 7 lines contain data about musicians, and then the rest are songs, right? Okay, so that's a bit interesting. And this is where the difference occurs, right? Usually our text files don't look like this. Just to make it a bit more evident what I'm talking about, if we open the text file here, right? So it says the first 7 lines contain data about musicians, right? And if we look at the first 7 lines here, they look a bit different from the rest of the lines, right? Just look at them. The information contained within these lines is not the same information contained within the rest of the lines here. That's because the first 7 lines are, as the paper says, musicians, and then the rest of the lines are songs. So usually the paper just has something like this, right? There's no differing types. Maybe it would be in terms of, one is a child clause and one is a parent clause. In this case, that's not the case, right? We have completely different types of objects. There's no relationship between them, right? So we essentially have to keep track of the current line we are on. If, as we're reading through our text file, we haven't yet reached line 7, that means that we are still dealing with songs. And then in the case that we have exceeded line number 7, we are now dealing, that means we're dealing with musicians, sorry. And then in the case that we have exceeded line number 7, it then means that we're dealing with songs now, right? So first 7 lines are musicians, the rest are songs. So we have to represent that logic in our code, that logic that keeps track of the current line that we are on, right? So before we proceed with that, firstly, we can finish off by looking at what our delimiter is. So our delimiter for all lines, regardless of if it's a musician or a song, seems to be a semicolon. So let's quickly just create another scanner here, sc line. And this scanner's job is to read in our line here and split it up wherever it sees a semicolon. Okay, right. And then now let's go back to implementing that logic of ours. So we said that we need to keep track of the current line we are on. Well, the only way to do that is to have a variable that counts the line that we're currently on. So above our while loop, we'll create a variable called line num, right? And we set it equal to 0 for now, right? And this will tell us the current line number that we're on. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to say if line num is less than 7, right? So if we're still dealing with the first 7 lines, then we are going to make song here, make musician. I keep saying song, make musician. Else we're going to make song, right? And then at the end, we're going to say line num plus plus, because we want the line number to increase by 1 for each iteration of the loop, right? So in this case, now we're making a musician, right? Line number is less than 7. And the way we make a musician is we firstly need to know what the musician's information looks like. So I always advise copying just one line from the text file and pasting it in here, just so we have reference of what the line looks like. Line looks like this. Just move this a bit back just so it's a bit more readable. Okay, so let me do that actually. Line looks like that, right? And we see that our line has, if we recall correctly, what's required in our musician's information. We have the name. I'm looking at this point here. We have the name, semicolon, the stage name, semicolon, the genre, semicolon, the start date, right? Okay. So that's what we're going to do here. Name is a string equals sc line dot next, right? String stage name equals sc line dot next. That's a string as well. Genre is an int genre equals sc line dot next int. And then we have start date. So local date start equals, oh, actually, big mistake there. It's a string. It's coming from our text file, right? String start equals sc line dot next. So everything that comes from our text file is represented as a string. Even though we know that this start thing should be a local date, we can't do what I was about to do where you say local date start equals that. That doesn't work, right? We have to read it in as a string. And then after reading it as a string, we convert it into a local date. So what we do here to say local date start, just put D at the end, equals local date. Let me import local date. Local date dot pass the second one with these two things. All right. So dot pass, and then we're trying to convert our start, right? So the date we want to convert is start. It's currently a string, and the format of the date we have to give it here. Dot of pattern. Right. If we look at the way the date is stored here, it's the year, the month, and the day separated by spaces. So we do the same thing here. Yeah. DD. And for the month, it's capital M. Don't ask me why. It just has to be capital M. Make sure it's capital, otherwise your code won't work, right? And then we now have everything we need, name, stage names, start date, in order to create our musician. So what we do now is we say musician A equals new musician, and we give it that information in the required order, genre, and start. Let's just double check if that's the correct order. So if I go to musician and look at the constructor, all right, it expects name, stage name, genre, and start date in that order. That is the order we gave it. So we are all good. All right. So now we have made our musician object, and we now want to add this object to our array at the top here. This array is going to be storing musician information, right? So we say muse array muse size plus plus equals a. All right. So this adds our musician to the next available position in our array, right? And then on this line here, we want to make, wait, sorry. So this is the case where we're dealing with a musician. And now in our else, we're dealing with a song. So it's almost a similar process, but not the same because we're making a song now. So if we look at what the song needs, we come back to our text file and just copy one of the lines representing a song. We do the same thing where we tell ourselves what the line looks like, right? And then we can proceed as well just to double check here. Right, so looking at this section now, the song has artist name followed by title, likes, and dislike. So that's the order we'll read things in here. Artist name is a string, and that's sc line dot next. We have string title. This is sc line dot next again because that's a string. Likes is an int, so int likes equals sc line dot next int, and then int dislikes equals sc line dot next int. Okay, cool. And then now we can make our song. Song A equals new song artist name. Well, let's just quickly double check the order, right? So if we go to our constructor in song, we'll see that it's the artist name followed by title, followed by likes, followed by dislikes. Okay. So artist name followed by title, followed by likes, followed by dislikes. Okay. And then we do the same thing where we add this song to our array equals A. Okay, cool. And then that is that for this question. Let's just quickly double check though. All right. So we're adding our musician to the array and incrementing counter, and then we are adding our song to the array and incrementing the counter, right? So that was 15 marks. And I don't think it was too difficult, because the only tricky part was knowing that you had to do this, right? But overall, if you knew the overall structure for reading from a text file, follow these steps, the code should have flown naturally. The only tricky part was this line num thing, which is a bit different from how you usually approach these questions. So that's just another way that, or rather, it's a reminder that you have to keep your head open. You can't just cram this thing of reading from a text file and think that it's only ever going to be in this specific format. They can switch the questions up a bit. So allow yourself to be able to think outside of the box. The issue with cramming is that if you cram this, you can't think outside of the box, because this is all you know. There is no box, right? You're just trapped here. You're trapped inside of the box, actually. So you can't even see what's outside of it. But if you understand what's happening, then you can explore outside of the box and try to answer the question that's being asked instead of just writing the code that you know, right? I feel like I was yapping a bit of nonsense there, but hopefully it made some sense. Okay, so now we're going to 4.4. This is our toString. All right, so this is another question that people tend to struggle with. So again, toString is something you can insert, and then we change how it's formatted. Right. Okay, so 4.4. Write code to create a toString method. This method should return a string with. Right. So the idea behind our toStrings in the music manager class is that it's supposed to print out information about this class, right? And what information are we interested in? Well, in this case, we are interested in seeing what is inside of our array, our music and song array. So the job of this toString here that we're making is to print out each thing inside of our arrays, right? That's the job of a toString, to convert information about our class into a string representation. Okay. And now here, these bullet points tell us exactly what's expected of our toString method, right? So usually how I start here is I make a string called result, set it equal to empty quotation marks. And then they say that the heading should be musicians, right? So what we do here is we say result plus equals musicians. And this is just us appending onto musicians. You can do that. And then underneath the heading, the details of all musicians on a new line. So what we do now is we loop through our musicians array, I less than muse size, right? I plus plus, and then result plus equals muse array I dot toString plus backslash n. Okay. And now, does this make sense when you look at it? A lot of people struggle with this code here because it looks a bit strange, right? But essentially, if you keep in mind what we're doing in our toString, which is printing the details of each and every single item in our array, then this might make a bit more sense, right? So what we've done now is we've added a header for musicians, as the question is asking. And then underneath this header that we've made, we are then adding details about each and every single musician in our array, right? So what this is doing, it keeps appending onto our result variable. It adds the details for each and every single musician using the toString method that we made in the musician class here, this method, right? So for each and every single musician that it sees, it calls the toString method on that musician and then adds a new line, so that the next time this loop runs, the details of the next musician are going to be on a separate line, right? And the goal here is so that we get something that looks like this. The title, or the heading rather, is musicians. That's represented by what we did here. And then these are all the musicians in the text file, which is what we're doing here. Right. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. If it doesn't, write a comment and I'll try to help you out. Okay. So going back to the question, we have done that for musicians, right? And then it says we should follow with a blank line. So we do result plus equals \n. And then we do a similar thing, more or less the same thing, honestly, but now for songs. So I'll just copy all that stuff, add it again here, and change the musician stuff to be songs, right? Songs. And then we have here song size, song array, and everything else stays more or less the same. And that's these 2 points. Okay. And now at the end of the day, once all this code is done running, our result variable is going to have some stuff inside of it, right? So what we do is we return result at the end and save. That is that. Okay, so now we're on question 4.5, right? So it says code a method named get long-term musicians. This method should return the name and length of time since the musician started their contract. I won't even read further because that's a lot of stuff to read. Let's just start with what we know, which is that we need to make a method called public get long-term musicians. At least now we can secure 1 mark before even confusing ourselves by reading further. But now the issue, what type is this method? Well, it says this method should return the name and length of time. Already from that, I can infer that this needs to be a string, right? It returns a string. And then let's dig a bit deeper into this method. Right, so it should return the name and length of time since the musician started their contract, only for musicians who started their contract more than 5 years from the current date. Okay, so what we're doing here in this method, 4.5, or question, right, rather, is essentially the same thing as we were doing in our toString here. We want to loop through our musician array and add the details of the musician to some result variable, and then at the end we return result. But the issue now is that we're not interested in seeing all of the musicians, right? We only want musicians who have a contract that is more than 5 years old to appear in our result variable, right? And now that's a bit abstract, so let me make it a bit more concrete here, and you'll see it looks almost similar to our toString. So for int I 0, I less than news size, I plus plus. Okay. So you might be tempted to do something like this, right? Since I said it's basically the same thing as our toString. But this would be incorrect. Because what this does, what we've just written here, like I said, adds all the details for every single musician into our result variable, then return the result. We don't want this to have all the musicians in it. We only want it to have musicians who have been with us for more than 5 years. And now a quick example to see what this should look like is we compare question 5.3 to 5.4, they are outputs, right? So 5.3, this is our toString method, the one that we made previously. And if we look at the musicians section, we see that we have 7 musicians, and these 7 musicians come directly from our text file. And we don't want this. What we want for this question, get long-term musicians, is the output to look something like 5.4. These people's contracts have been signed more than 5 years ago. So we output their details in this format, their name and the years that they've been with us, right? So essentially what's supposed to happen is before we add this musician to our result variable, we need to firstly check how old their contract is. When did they start their contract? Is the start date, is the difference between the start date and today's date in terms of years greater than 5, right? We need that if statement here before we add them. So we move that in there. And now the question is, how do you get the difference of dates, right? We want the difference in years, right? Well, we know that we have to subtract today's date from the date that they joined and then check what that difference is. So something that you might be tempted to do is maybe make a date that represents today's date, local date, can't type, local date dot now, right? So that's today's date. And then you might want to do something like int years equals now dot get year minus the date that the musician started. We get that from the musician's object dot get start, right, dot get year, if that's correct, right? Because this is our getter for start date. If we go to musician object, if we look at the getter itself, we see that it returns a local date start, and we come back here. So this is our musician object, the musician at position I inside of our array. We're getting their start date and then getting the year of their start date, and then subtracting that from today's year. But there's an issue with this, because this doesn't account for cases when maybe the person joined. Let's say Jenny Sampson joined in 2020. Today's date is what? 27 August. So that'd be 2708. But they joined in the next day, right? So let's say they joined in on 28 August in 2020. Technically, if we were to compare them with today's date, they haven't been with us for 5 years yet, because today is only the 27th. It has not yet reached the 28th. So they've been with us for what? 4 years, 364 days, not 5 years. And this is something that your code should account for. But the issue with what we've done now is that we have only considered the years when making our subtractions here. So your code won't account for those edge cases, right? It's not like if you're born in 2004, immediately on the 1st of January, every year, it's your birthday, right? No, your birthday was somewhere during the year. So you don't automatically increase your age when the new year starts. You only get older when your birthday happens, right? So similar thinking here. We can't do this. What we should rather do is use an object called period, right? And this is something we have to import. So import period, I usually call it div. And what this helps us do is get the period between two dates. So we want to get the period between the start, if I recall correctly, let's just see how this works again. Period, between the start date and the end date, right? So the start date would be muse array I dot start, get start, and the end date would be today's date, right? So we want to get the difference between the start date and today's date. And then we want that difference, right? Because this just gives us a period object. We want this difference in terms of years. So we make another variable int years equals diff dot get years. And this does all that edge case checking for us. And it looks very nice to work with, right? I mean, you don't have to think too much about what you're doing here. You're just getting the period between two dates, and then you get the difference in terms of years. This object here, period, does most of the heavy lifting for you. So I highly advise that you familiarize yourself with the period class for dealing with dates, right? And then all we do now is we say, okay, if years greater than 5, then we add that musician's details to our array. And that is that method. We are now done, finished. Okay. And let's go to, actually, no, I'm lying to you. I'm lying, because the format of the person is different. We're not just printing out their two-string details. We have to print out their name and the years they've been with us. So instead of muse array I dot toString, it should be muse array I dot get name plus a space, and then plus the number of years they've been with us, and then we just put the word years at the end there. Okay, let's just zoom out a bit more. All right, so that should be it. Okay, and now we move on to question 5, right? So question 5 again needs us to make a new class called music UI. So that's what we do here. We come here, new Java class, music. UI, zoom in, and we now have to add a main method, right? And now how do I know that we need to add a main method? Well, they say create a text-based user interface called Music UI that will allow simple input and output. So these guys, the guys who made this paper, instead of speaking clearly so that you understand what's happening, they use all these words here. And all these words just mean make a main method. So sometimes, they don't have your best interest at heart, but I do. So I'm telling you, this means make a main method. All right. So we made a main method, and then 5.2, declare and instantiate a music manager object. So that's what we do here. Music manager, if I can type correctly, music manager. Wow, music manager A equals new music manager. Right. Okay. And then 5.3, write code to call the appropriate method in music manager class to display a list of all musician, yada, yada, yada. So it's long. But if you look at what's expected here, all they're saying is that we should use our toString method, the toString that we made inside of music manager. This one here, right? So South A dot toString, that's it. And now hopefully if we run this, we should see an output that looks more or less similar to this one here. So let's click run. Okay. And would you look at that? That looks similar. Yeah, that's good. So we have musicians, rebel. Oh, there's an issue though. I see a problem. We have numbers being printed here, 4, 1, 1, 1. Whereas if you look here in musicians, we have the actual word of the genre, techno rock, piano. Okay, so that's one thing we have to fix. Now, where would that issue be? Well, let's work backwards, right? Because these are issues that you can face in your paper. It's always good to know how to solve problems, right? So there's an issue. The issue is how this output is being represented. Well, what method are we calling that's giving us this issue? Well, we're calling our toString method. That's what's giving us this output. So let's work back. This toString method that we're calling belongs to the music manager object. So if we go to the music manager class and look at our toString, we then have to check, where am I getting the details for the musicians? Well, this for loop is responsible for looping through my musician array. And this point right here is where I get the details of the musicians. So something is wrong with the musician toString. Okay, so we have to dig a bit deeper. We go to the musician class and we look at that one's toString. Okay, so the issue here is we're getting the stage name being printed and then a number. Our expectation is to get the stage name and the variable, not the variable, the genre as a string, right? So something about this part here is incorrect. What is genre? Well, let's check. Genre is an int. We don't want an int. We want the string representation of the genre. Do we have a method perhaps that does that for us? Indeed we do. So instead of calling genre in this toString, we're supposed to call get genre, like that. And then if we run our code again, we should hopefully not see numbers in these positions, but should rather see the words themselves being printed. So let's hit run. And would you look at that? We have the words being printed and everything else is the same format, right? And don't worry about the tabs here. As long as you represented them in your code like we did with our toStrings, that'll be fine. The formatting sometimes differs based on the version of NetBeans you're using, but as long as your code is correct, don't worry too much about the tabbing, right? So that's the first part, musicians, it's all correct. And then let's come down to our songs. Let's look at the first song just to double check here. So songs, running energy 73556987. Running energy 73556987. All the same. Perfect. So our toString is now working correctly. Okay, so that's question 5.3. 5.4 now requires us to write code to call the appropriate method. Again, just a bunch of words. If we look at the expectation here, all they're saying is that we should use the method we made here, the get long-term musicians method. So we will do that. I'll just out here, just get a space in between our two separate methods. And then I will now call, what is this, get long-term musicians. And if we run this again, we should hopefully at the end of our output see this. So if we run, okay. Now again, there's a bit of a formatting issue. It's correct, but there's a formatting issue. There's no space in between here. So one method is causing that problem. Get long-term musicians. Get long-term musicians belongs to Music Manager. So we go to Music Manager. We look at this method at the place where we print out the information. That is line 68. We come here, we add a space. If we run this again, there are now spaces in between, right? And now obviously there's differences in the years, like the actual numbers, because this paper was in 2024. It is now 2025. So the years might be a bit different there. And that is that. There's still, however, question 6 and question 7, which we won't cover in the video itself. If you need help with this or anything more specific, check the links in my description for the website and any other means of contacting me. That way I can help tutor you throughout the paper and anything else that you might be struggling with. I have quite a few students who've gone from 40s and 50s to now achieving 70s, 80s, some even 90s. So I'm quite confident that, if you do feel like you need tutoring, I am able to help you out with that. However, if that's not something you're interested in, I do hope the video helped out. If something was not clear, just, drop a comment and I will explain further there. And with that being said, good luck, study hard, and you will do well. Thank you.